Hi guys, it's Janae and welcome back to my channel. Also, if you're new here, I post new videos every week, and I'm sorry today for this voiceover, but I will be showing clips and receipts of everything that I mention. I just came to the realization that if I wanted to make this video, then I would unfortunately not be able to film it with a camera because it would just take way too long. This is a 17-page script, if that gives you any idea of the length of what this video is probably going to amount to. And I just realized I didn't have the time and lighting, because I work with natural lights, to be able to do this. So I apologize, but hopefully I can still keep the video quality to a good minimum. So the end of the Shadowhunters TV series is nigh, and for some reason I thought the best way to handle this is to start with a video on characterization in the Mortal Instruments, more specifically the characterization of Clary Fray. So I'm going to be honest, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with the book series. I really enjoy the side characters and I really enjoyed the TV show, but the main characters and main character relationship, aka Clary and Jace, really rubbed me the wrong way, so I wanted to talk about that. I will say that I'm planning on making follow-up Shadowhunter related videos that will be more positive, but this is not that video. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's dive right into it. When asked on Tumblr if Clary was meant to be a little annoying, the author had this to say: "Look, it's okay if you don't like Clary. Characters are like real people. There is no such thing as one that everyone loves. She is meant to be realistic and flawed, of course. She's impulsive and rash, she's quick to act, and sometimes also quick to judge. And just like with real people, that means that some will like her and some won't. In fact, with Clary, I deliberately gave her a lot of traits I associate with boy heroes in fiction: impulsiveness, recklessness, lack of regard for her own safety, the responsibility to protect her mother, best friend, boyfriend, the responsibility to save the world." I wanted to see how they would sit with a girl protagonist, and well, a lot of people don't like it. One thing I do find interesting is that with male protagonists, they are very rarely called annoying. You can hate male protagonists or even find them evil, but annoying, being a very dismissive term, is applied almost uniquely to women and female characters. In fact, this seemed so across the board to me that I looked around and indeed found a great essay by Lupogus about this. "To anyone annoyed by a woman, an open letter. Jerry Ryan showed up as a sassy con artist on Leverage, and people groaned about how annoying her character is. Michelle Borth played a self-confident sailor who sleeps with Steve McGarrett on Hawaii 5-0, and someone writes a horrifying story about how she gets murdered and gets dozens of people praising it for killing off the annoying bitch. People gush about Michael Fassbender and complain incessantly about January Jones in X-Men First Class, called one amazing and the other, you guessed it, annoying. Ellen Page is so annoying in Inception. Gwyneth Paltrow is so annoying in Iron Man. Annoying, annoying, annoying. It would be funny if it weren't so predictable." So I guess what I would say is that, of course, being a female character doesn't mean you get a pass from anyone ever not liking you. But if you're using the word annoying to describe a girl or woman, real or fictional, take a moment to stop and ponder what it is that makes you think that the character is annoying. What precise action has she taken that bothered you so much, and whether they would have bothered you if a boy did them. So clearly there's a lot to unpack with this, and since she asked so nicely, I'll explain exactly why I have a problem with Clary as a character. Before I do this, however, I do want to say that though Cassandra Clare says that she doesn't expect everyone to like Clary, the way that she portrays Clary seems to speak against it in the manner that she still seems to expect the audience to mostly be on Clary's side for things, even when she is being unreasonable. So all of that is said with this in mind. I do want to say that her response feels very defensive, and in some ways fair enough, because I don't think it's really nice for someone to send such a message directly to the author where they can't avoid the negativity. But I do have a problem with how she pushes the focus of the person's question onto the word annoying, to the point of attempting to invalidate the person's question. So in response to that, here is why I think Clary Fray is a bit of a jerk. Is that better? For real though, she mentioned boy heroes in this, so to contrast and compare, I'm going to pull out one of my favorite boy heroes who was also dragged into the magical world and lost his mother, and in a lot of ways have correlations to what Clary is going through. But he is also 4 years younger than Clary, and so one would think that he would be more immature than her. And that is Percy Jackson. Now, before we get into this comparison, I do want to say that there is definitely moments where I could see what the author was going for. I could see Clary for the sassy, sarcastic main character that she was intended to be. But the point of comparison is to show where I think it went wrong in terms of full delivery. For me, a lot of frustration came with how Clary handled the people around her. So, for my first example, let's look at Simon. She is so dismissive of Simon, it's not even funny. This is literally one of the first scenes we have with them to show their friendship. "So," said Simon, "pretty good music, eh?" Clary didn't reply. "I feel," Simon went on, "that everything DJ Bad is doing is a singularly exceptional job. Don't you agree?" Clary rolled her eyes and didn't answer. Simon hated trance music. "Meanwhile," Simon added, "I wanted to tell you that lately I've been cross-dressing. Also, I'm sleeping with your mom. Thought you should know." So obviously I've removed some of the description of what Clary is observing as Simon babbles on about these things, but she just hums and haws non-committedly throughout all this and basically ignores him throughout it, and I'm just standing here wondering why I should like this protagonist if this is how she treats her friends. And I know people will be like, "Oh, but she was distracted by what was going on with the Shadowhunters," but her dismissiveness is not a one-time thing. Here's another example. "Do you have to be sarcastic about everything?" Clary snaps. Simon blinks, clearly taken aback. "I thought you liked when I was witty and ironic." That quote is from after Clary and her mother have a fight, and here's the thing. This quote seems to perfectly illustrate their relationship, because throughout everything, Simon constantly makes these jokes and they always fall flat because Clary is always reprimanding him for them. So it kind of ends up looking like Clary thinks Simon is this massive annoyance, that her best friend is this massive annoyance. Like, what? How am I, as the reader, supposed to like and appreciate the awesome friendship that these two apparently have if the demonstration of their friendship is a constant annoyance from the one character towards the other? So now to compare, let's look at how Percy introduces Grover. All the way into the city, I put up with Nancy Bobofit, the freckled red-headed kleptomaniac girl, hitting my best friend Grover in the back of the head with chunks of peanut butter and ketchup sandwich. Grover was an easy target. He was scrawny, he cried when he got frustrated, he must have been held back several grades because he was the only 6th grader with acne and the starts of a wispy beard on his chin. On top of all of that, he was crippled. He had a note excusing him from PE for the rest of his life because he had some kind of muscular disease in his legs. He walked funny, like every step hurt him. But don't let that fool you. You should have seen him run when it was Enchilada Day in the cafeteria. His introduction can be seen as rude, which, fair enough. But the way that it is handled also establishes two things. One, that Percy is friends with someone who might generally be considered a loser. And two, it doesn't matter, because regardless of what everyone else sees, this is Percy's best friend, and he's willing to get expelled if it means stopping his friend from being bullied. We might not yet have seen what this relationship is like from those few sentences, but we get a very clear indication of how close they are and about Percy's character as a whole. It goes towards showing Percy's loyalty and selflessness, which is never really demonstrated for me in Clary's character. But yeah, so even just from her interactions with Simon, Clary isn't really cast in the best light for me, and that's not even the worst of it. Let's talk about the girl hating in this book, especially where Isabel is concerned. Here's a quote from the first time that Simon meets Isabel. To Clary's surprise, Simon said nothing to this. He was too busy staring at Isabel, rapt and open-mouthed. Of course, Clary realized with a sharp stab of annoyance. Isabel was exactly Simon's type. Tall, glamorous, and beautiful. Come to think of it, maybe that was everybody's type. Clary stopped wondering about the peanut, fish, olive, tomato soup and started wondering what would happen if she dumped the content of the pot on Isabel's head. Like, this literally comes out of nowhere. Isabel is asking Jace rather sarcastically if Simon is one of Jace's dad's killers, and this is the sentence that follows. Like, really? Is this jealousy supposed to make her relatable? She doesn't have a crush on Simon, so why the hell is she so freaking aggressive and possessive? It kind of feels like, oh, I don't want him, but no one else can have him either because he's mine. And it really isn't a good look. Clary wondered if perhaps Isabel was smarter than Jace gave her credit for. Maybe she would realize what an amazing guy Simon was. How funny, how smart, how cool. Maybe they'd start dating. The idea filled her with nameless horror. Again, really? It started out nice and then devolved into whatever this is. And again, Clary wasn't sure if Isabel was talking to her or to Simon, so she said nothing. Isabel's hair tickled her face, smelling of some kind of vanilla perfume. Clary fought the urge to sneeze. She hated vanilla perfume. She'd never understood why some girls felt the need to smell like dessert. So now we're getting petty about the way girls smell. Heaven forbid you want to smell good. And this is how the scene after the previous one starts. The party didn't start until midnight, so with the whole day to kill, Jace and Alec disappeared to the weapons room, and Isabel and Simon announced their intention of going for a walk in Central Park, so that she could show him the fairy circles. Simon asked Clary if she wanted to come along. Stifling a murderous rage, she refused on the grounds of exhaustion. Like, honestly, if you want to convey that Clary is sad or frustrated because it doesn't feel like Simon is supporting her, do it in a more sympathetic way. Because her being in a murderous rage because Isabel is showing Simon some fairy circles really isn't cutting it. And then the freaking cherry on top is this one. Ow, you hit my head. It was a girl's voice, Isabel. She flicked on the light next to the bed and regarded Clary resentfully, rubbing at her scalp. She seemed to shimmer in the lamplight. She was wearing a long silvery skirt and sequin top, and her nails were painted like glittering coins. Strands of silver beads were caught in her dark hair. She looked like a moon goddess. Clary hated her. There's a difference between being self-conscious and being petty, and if you need to hate on another girl just because of your own insecurities, you're not winning any points with me. Not to mention how all of these instances of hate from Clary seem to be because of jealousy. None of these come from actual legitimate issues she has with Isabel. So even though she later is genuinely frustrated with Isabel for leading Simon on, the indignation feels flat because of all the hate that she's given Isabel previously, and because she herself kind of treats Simon like crap. In comparison, here is the first time that Percy has a negative connotation towards someone. I was about to unwrap my sandwich when Nancy Bobofit appeared in front of me with her ugly friends. I guess she'd gotten tired of stealing from the tourists and dumped her half-eaten lunch in Grover's lap. Oops, she grinned at me with her crooked teeth. Her freckles were orange, as if someone had spray painted her face with liquid Cheetos. This isn't a kind description either, and could have made Percy look like a real jerk, but At least it makes sense to the audience because we have seen Nancy bullying Percy multiple times before this description comes up. And by the time that we get to this, we understand that it's more to do with her ugly character shining through than it is a genuine stab at Nancy Bobofit's looks. If Clary's frustration over Isabel's looks had been coupled with her concern for her friend's heart, I would have been a lot more lenient because we've all had the judgmental moments, but usually it stems from an understandable source. And I'm sorry to say, but so much hate because of Clary's own insecurities is just a bit too much. Now, next, let's address Clary's relationship with her mother. So this is how we meet Clary's mom. People always told Clary that she looked like her mother, but she couldn't see it herself. The only thing that was similar about them was their figures. They were both slender, with small chests and narrow hips. She knew she wasn't beautiful like her mother was. To be beautiful, you had to be willowy and tall. When you were short as Clary was, just over 5 feet, you were cute. Not pretty or beautiful, but cute. Throw in carroty hair and a face full of freckles, and she was a Raggedy Ann to her mother's Barbie doll. As far as descriptions go, it's fine, I suppose, but it's very superficial, and it tells you very little about how Clary views her mother. And then, when it's followed with Clary telling her mother that if she was going to ground her, to just get it over with, it creates a very negative image of their relationship. Not to mention other gems like, "We'll have plenty of time to talk while we're on vacation," Clary said venomously, and had the satisfaction of seeing her mother flinch. "Don't wait up," she added, and grabbed Simon's arm. She half dragged him out of the front door. Now, don't get me wrong, of course, as teenagers, you're not going to have a perfect relationship with your parents. But when any and all scenes we are shown between the mother and daughter are hostile, it's hard to just accept that of course they actually really love each other because we're never shown it. Also, it seriously decreases the investment I felt in Clary's mission to get her mum back. And since it's meant to be the central plot, it's kind of a problem. In contrast, here's how Percy introduces his mother. A word about my mother, before you meet her. Her name is Sally Jackson, and she's the best person in the world, which just proves my theory that the best people in the world have the rottenest luck. Her own parents died in a plane crash when she was 5, and she was raised by an uncle who didn't care much for her. She wanted to be a novelist, so she spent her high school working to save enough money for a college with a good writing program. Then her uncle got cancer, and she had to quit school her senior year to take care of him. After he died, she was left with no money, no family, and no diploma. That to me says a lot more about both Sally and Percy than the previous paragraph says about Clary and Jocelyn. It's really frustrating because at every turn, Clary is presented with the opportunity to show her closeness and her relationship with people in her life, the people she is supposedly saving the world for. Yet there's no connection there because Clary tells us about how much she values them when she's talking to Jace, but she never really shows it. But with that said, Clary's utter lack of connection with the people around her isn't the only thing that counts against her. Let's talk about Clary's complete insensitivity. This is a scene from when Clary asks Isabel if she and Jace are related. Why doesn't he live with his own parents? For a fleeting moment, Isabel looked uncomfortable. Because they're dead. Clary's mouth opened in surprise. Did they die in an accident? No. Isabel fidgeted, pushing a dark lock of hair behind her left ear. His mother died when he was born. His father was murdered when he was 10. Jace saw the whole thing. Oh, Clary said, her voice small. Was it demons? Why is this Clary's only reaction? Isabel has just revealed some serious and personal information, and Clary doesn't feel embarrassed for prodding, doesn't feel sorry for Jace, doesn't feel horrified. Her mouth just opens in surprise, and her voice grows small. She overreacts on all other things, but here, where you could show her sensitivity and humanity past all the snark, you do nothing. She comes across as an insensitive jerk, and it happens again when she just outright asks Isabel if Alec is gay without any regard to if Alec might have wanted this to be a secret or if Isabel would have been okay with possibly finding out something like that. All right, Clary heard the stiffness in her own voice. I guess I didn't realize it was such a big deal. Like, how out of touch can you be? Even in today's day and age, it's a touchy subject, not something for you to just bulldoze into without freaking thought. And here is another gem for Clary being completely overreactionary on things and then nonplussed on something else. This is when Simon is kidnapped by the vampires. Did he climb out? It wasn't an unreasonable question, but Clary, exhausted and panic-stricken, reacted unreasonably. Of course he didn't, she screamed. You think he wanted to get smashed under someone's car, killed by a cat? Now, I actually don't think it's an overreaction. Her reaction makes perfect sense to me. Because she is panicked, she is worried for her friend. That reaction actually tells us a lot. But then you have this. Wait, Clary interrupted. What would they want with Simon? I thought they weren't allowed to hurt people. My guess, said Magnus not unkindly. They assumed he was a tame rat and thought it would be funny to kill a Shadowhunter's pet. They don't like you so much. Whatever the Accords might say, there's nothing in the Covenant about not killing animals. They're going to kill him? Clary said, staring. That's the reaction you're going with? To finding out your best friend might be killed? Or worse, might already be dead. It's just like, can you be any more unrelatable? It's very, very frustrating when we're presented with moments like this, and this is our main character's reaction. Okay, so pulling back a bit, there's one other instance that I really think paints Clary in a bad light, and all just because of the way it was structured and presented to the audience. So she, Simon, Jace, Isabel and Alec are at a restaurant and they're discussing the situation between Shadowhunters and the Downworlders. Now, if you're brought up in a society that believes in equality across the board and suddenly you're introduced to a world where vampires, werewolves, warlocks and more exist, and they, for the most part, look just like any other person, it stands to reason that you would still see them as one of you. Different, yes, but human. Only you find out that apparently they're seen as lower by the Shadowhunters. The way the situation is handled is so strange because it seems as if the author is trying to have the theme of equality being an undercurrent in the story. It seems as if Clary and Simon are set up to be the morally correct people in the situation, the ones who would believe that everyone was equal, and they constantly go on about them not being less just because they're mundanes. Yet they are given these lines in the conversation. This whole downworlder thing. You don't hunt them because they're not exactly demons, but they're not exactly people either. Vampires kill, they drink blood. Like letting spiders live because they eat mosquitoes, Clary thought. So they're good enough to let live, good enough to make your food for you, good enough to flirt with, but not really good enough. I mean, not as good as people. Better than mundanes, said Simon. So they're weak, asked Clary. Once again, I get what the author was going for, but it kind of makes it feel as if Clary is the one with the quote-unquote racism, rather than it being the Shadowhunters who see themselves as better than the Downworlders. If the conversation had played out the other way around, it would have been good because then you could see the inherent bias and prejudice that Shadowhunters have, and then you can also see how having a person who sees everyone as equal could be a great positive and unintentional influence that Clary could have on the sheltered Shadowhunter world. But as it stands, all you get are these lines from her and Simon with no indication on whether Clary agrees or disagrees with the sentiments that she's spewing. They could have literally just added Clary questioned, enraged somewhere in there, and it would have immediately swung the tone of the conversation around. as it stands, she seems pretty indifferent. And yeah, all of the examples that I've given you might have seemed pretty stupid, but with them all continuously adding up, I feel fair to say that my insistence that Clary is a bit of a jerk has pretty solid ground in my opinion. And now, I know some people will throw the, oh, but if it was a guy acting this way, it would have been okay thing at me, but I disagree. The reason why Jace's attitude works for him is because he's a secondary character. Yeah, he's snappy and sarcastic, but generally when there's no outright malice shown to the audience by the author, audiences tend to assume that there's a reason for his closed offness. You assume that if you were to enter his head, all his reactions to things would make sense because you would understand his motives. And because the author paints it as banter and not true mean-spiritedness, you accept the cue that this guy is not meant to be a bad guy and that you'll find out what's going on later. Same with Annabeth in Percy Jackson. She's snappy and sarcastic and sassy and even prideful in some instances, but because of the way it's written, you very clearly see that there's something more to it, that she's not a mean-spirited jerk. Those are the cues we are given, so we safely assume that if you were to enter her point of view, you would understand that her anger about Cyclopses come from a specific event, or that her jadedness comes from the feud between Athena and Poseidon. And that's where the disconnect happens for me with Clary. If she'd been a side character whose thoughts we couldn't read, she'd have worked. You would have seen her as the feisty, sarcastic, but well-intentioned girl, because you would have kind of auto-completed her motivations for yourself and assumed the best of her. But when you're faced with her sarcasm and sassiness, only to learn that it is just her truly snapping at someone or being mean-spirited, and then you're faced with her jealousy and you realize that, oh, it's not because she actually likes him and she doesn't know how to express it otherwise, it's just her being jealous for the sake of being jealous and having thoughts like, oh, shut up, Simon, or why is Simon looking at that pretty girl and why can't I be as pretty and I hate her for it. It kind of strips away any illusion of good-spiritedness that you might have assigned to her character otherwise. Lastly, I want to add that I would have let her character be because it's okay for characters to be seriously flawed. It might not be my cup of tea, but if it is the way the author wanted to write her, then fine. But it's the author's insistence that her character was meant to be this selfless, morally good character with the responsibility of saving the world in the model of a typical hero that really frustrated me. Because she's not a typical well-intentioned, well-meaning, selfless hero, in my opinion. All the reactions that she gives seem to contradict that. So no, I don't think you can just blame the gender and move on with your life. Plain and simple, I think that there's plenty of reason to not like Clary, and I don't think it's fair that genuine frustration over her characterizations are simply being dismissed as quote-unquote sexism. But yeah, time to calm down. These things really just frustrated me because even though the author says that she doesn't expect Clary to get a pass because she's a girl, it does kind of feel like that's exactly what she's hoping for. And I just had to get this off of my chest. So thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. My social media and Patreon will be linked in the description box below. And let me know in the comments below if there are any main characters that also rub you the wrong way. Otherwise, I'll see you guys again next time. Bye! So obviously I couldn't keep all the quotes that I wanted to, but here's a bonus quote. Clary wondered if there were any ugly vampires, or maybe fat ones. Maybe they didn't make vampires out of ugly people. Or maybe ugly people just didn't want to live forever. Our protagonist, everyone. I wonder why more people don't love her.